The air in the small-town chapel hung thick with the scent of wilting wildflowers and unkept promises, a shroud settling over the young woman at the altar. Her dress, a pristine white against the dark mahogany of the pews, shimmered under the stained glass depiction of a benevolent saint, an ironic contrast to the venomous whispers that coiled around her. She was Adira, and on this day, her wedding day, she was to be joined in matrimony to a man who had promised her a future, a home, a shield against the world's harsh gaze. But the man was gone. He had not arrived. The silence stretched, a taut string of humiliation, snapping only with the shuffling feet of the fleeing congregation, each step a judgment, each averted glance a stone hurled at her exposed heart. Her skin, the color of rich earth, seemed to absorb the light, making her a stark, solitary figure against the church's fading grandeur. The dream she had woven, delicate as spider silk, shredded around her, leaving only the raw ache of abandonment. She stood, not just left, but intentionally displayed, a monument to a cruel jest, left to absorb the pity and the scorn until, it seemed, she might simply rot where she stood, a forgotten bloom in a forgotten place. The image of her standing there, a beautiful, solemn statue, burned itself into the collective memory of the town, a scar on the face of their quiet, prejudiced existence. The sun, once a hopeful beam through the tall arched windows, now seemed to mock her, painting patterns of broken glass across the empty aisle. Every breath she took felt like a betrayal, every beat of her own heart a reminder of the man who had stolen her hope and left her for dead. She heard their whispers, left at the altar, a phrase dripping with a derision that transcended mere gossip, reaching into the deep-seated prejudices that ran like veins through the town's very foundation. Her shoulders remained straight, her chin held high, but within, a profound devastation took root, growing with each passing minute, entwining itself with a nascent, unfamiliar rage. This was more than a broken engagement. This was a public execution of her spirit, a communal statement of her worthlessness in their eyes. The very air seemed to thicken with the unspoken truth of their contempt, a silent, suffocating presence in the hallowed halls. They said the trial would be fair, but from the moment she stepped into the courthouse, justice had already left town. But, before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. The church emptied, the creak of the heavy oak door echoing the finality of the moment. Adira remained, a ghost in her own tragedy, the white of her dress, a stark, luminous symbol of her unfulfilled hopes. The air, once thick with anticipatory joy, now pressed down with the weight of unshed tears and the lingering scent of judgment. Her breath hitched, a ragged sound in the cavernous space. Each minute that ticked by was a wound. Each beat of her heart a painful reminder of the chasm that had opened beneath her feet. She was not just left, she was exposed, crucified by the stares and whispers of a town that had never truly seen her beyond the color of her skin, beyond the convenient label of outsider. The societal figures, the matrons with their pursed lips, and the men with their dismissive glances, had all retreated, leaving her to the echoing emptiness. The silence was a hammer, beating down on her spirit, crushing the last vestiges of dignity she had desperately clung to. She felt the rot begin, not in her flesh, but in the deepest recesses of her soul. It was a creeping decay, a sense of worthlessness instilled by a community that reveled in her public humiliation. The sunlight, filtering through the stained glass, cast fragmented colors across the aisle, no longer illuminating her path but dissecting her vulnerability. She wondered if she would simply stand there forever, a grotesque monument to scorn, a cautionary tale whispered to disobedient children. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint rustle of the wind outside, a mournful sigh through the ancient trees. Her hands, clenching and unclenching, trembled with a rage she couldn't yet articulate, a fury born of injustice and profound sorrow. The beautiful dress, once a symbol of new beginnings, now felt like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. It spoke of a betrayal so deep it permeated the very fabric of her being. The image of her abandoned at the altar would spread like wildfire through the valleys and over the dusty plains. A morbid fable for travelers, and a stark reminder of prejudice in this corner of the world. Adira felt the weight of it. The eyes of the world, even those unseen, pressing upon her, forcing her to confront a brutal truth. She was alone, utterly and irrevocably alone, in a place that wished her gone, her vision blurred, not with tears, but with a profound sense of injustice that burned behind her eyes. The humiliation was a physical ache, a knot in her stomach that twisted tighter with every passing moment. She was a flower plucked too soon, left to wither and perish, not just by one man, but by an entire society. The future, once a vibrant tapestry, now unraveled into a single, bleak thread, leaving her suspended in a void. Her heart, a drum against her ribs, pounded a desperate rhythm, a silent plea for release from the relentless agony of her public despair. Just as the silence threatened to consume her entirely, a shadow fell across the threshold. Not the playful dance of sunlight, but a formidable, unyielding darkness. A man stood framed in the archway, backlit by the searing afternoon sun, his silhouette a jagged cutout against the pale sky. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the lean, hardened look of someone who had seen too much and felt too little. His hat was pulled low, obscuring his eyes, but not the deep, crisscrossing scars that marred the side of his face, a roadmap of past violence and pain. He moved with a quiet, predatory grace, his spurs a faint chime against the wooden floor, the only sound breaking the chapel's morbid stillness. Adira watched him, a deer caught in a hunter's gaze, her breath catching in her throat. He was an anomaly, a disruption to her carefully orchestrated despair. He carried the weight of a hardened life, etched into the lines around his mouth, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand that hovered near the worn butt of a revolver. He stopped several feet from her, his presence filling the empty space with an almost suffocating intensity. The air itself seemed to crackle around him, charged with an unspoken history. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, observing her with an unnerving stillness. It was not a gaze of pity nor of judgment, but of something deeper, something akin to recognition. A silent, unsettling dialogue passed between them, two solitary figures adrift in a world determined to break them. Adira felt a strange mix of fear and an almost perverse curiosity stir within her. Who was this man? This sudden, unexpected rupture in her carefully constructed tragedy. His aura was one of danger, a simmering violence just beneath the surface, but also, surprisingly, a profound weariness, as if he carried the burdens of 1,000 lost souls. Finally, a low voice, like gravel shifting in a dry riverbed, broke the spell. They left you. It wasn't a question, but a statement of stark fact, devoid of inflection, yet somehow carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken observations. Adira flinched, her composure cracking under the blunt truth of his words. She wanted to scream, to lash out at the injustice, at the man who dared to voice the humiliation so openly. But the words caught in her throat, strangled by the raw emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It was alive, humming with the unspoken tension between them. He had acknowledged her, not as the abandoned bride, but as a person, a raw, exposed entity in a moment of profound crisis. His presence was not comfort, but a stark, unsettling mirror, reflecting the grim reality of her situation, daring her to confront it. This stranger, this scarred gunslinger, was an unwelcome disruption to her planned collapse, a force pulling her back from the precipice of oblivion. The gunslinger took a slow, deliberate step forward, his gaze unwavering, finally piercing through the brim of his hat to meet her own. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, holding within them a deep, ancient sorrow, yet also an unyielding resolve. They left you to rot, he repeated, the words a low rumble, stripping away any pretense. A fine specimen, left to the vultures of this town. Adira stiffened, a flicker of anger piercing through the fog of her despair. She was no specimen, no carrion for the hungry eyes of the prejudiced. Before she could voice her indignation, he continued, his voice softer now, yet still edged with the metallic taste of finality. But you won't rot, not here, not like this. He extended a hand, scarred and calloused, a hand that spoke of violence, of survival, of a path walked far from the well-trodden. His statement was not an invitation, but an assertion, a strange, unconventional declaration. I claim you. The words hung in the air, heavy with a double meaning she couldn't quite grasp. Was it ownership? Protection? a twisted act of defiance against the town that had wronged them both, in their own ways? Adira stared at his outstretched hand, then back at his scarred face, trying to decipher the enigma that stood before her. This was not a rescue from a fairy tale. This was a proposition from a dark, shadowed world, a pact with a devil who might, paradoxically, be her only salvation. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. Her instinct screamed danger, but another, smaller voice, a voice born of desperation and newfound rage, whispered possibilities. What was there left to lose? Her dignity had been stripped, her future annihilated. Perhaps this shadowed stranger, this scarred gunslinger, offered a path, however perilous, away from the suffocating despair of her present. She saw the subtle tremors in his stance, the tension in his jaw, suggesting a history as broken and fractured as her own. He was not a hero, but a survivor, his moral compass perhaps skewed by the brutal realities he had endured. Yet, in his eyes, there was no pity, only a grim understanding. This man, who had appeared like a specter in her darkest hour, offered not comfort, but an escape, a stark, unsentimental solution to her impossible predicament. He was a force of nature, untamed and unpredictable, a stark contrast to the stifling conformity of the town she now despised. Her hand, hesitant at first, slowly reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough calluses of his palm. The contact was jarring, an electric current of unspoken desperation and shared defiance. It was not a gesture of love, nor even of trust, but an act of raw, desperate rebellion against the fate that had been so cruelly handed to her. In that moment, a fragile, unspoken alliance was forged, born not of affection, but of necessity, of shared pain, and a desperate yearning for something beyond the rot. The world outside the chapel doors was a harsh, unforgiving expanse of sun-baked earth and distant, shimmering mesas. The gunslinger, whose name she still did not know, led her silently to two horses tethered under a dusty mesquite tree. One, a sturdy roan, carried a bedroll and saddlebags, while the other, a gentle mare, waited patiently. He offered no explanation, no comfort, simply a stern glance that conveyed the urgency of their departure. Adira, still clad in her ruined wedding gown, felt the sun's oppressive heat immediately. The fine lace and satin, once a symbol of purity, now felt like a cruel mockery, clinging to her skin. She gathered the voluminous skirt, hoisted herself onto the mare, and without a backward glance, they rode out of town, leaving behind the whispers, the judgment, and the bitter taste of betrayal. The journey was a crucible of silence. The only sounds were the rhythmic thud of hooves on parched ground, the creak of leather, and the incessant hum of cicadas in the dry brush. Adira rode beside him, acutely aware of his presence, the dangerous stillness that emanated from him. She stole glances at his profile, the jagged lines of his scars, the unreadable set of his jaw. He was a closed book, a mystery wrapped in a shroud of dust and gun smoke. Yet, his silence was not dismissive. It was watchful, almost protective in its intensity. As the miles stretched into an endless ribbon of horizon, the initial fear began to recede, replaced by a strange sense of unreality. She was free, in a way, from the confines of her public humiliation, but bound by an unspoken pact to this enigmatic stranger. A memory, sharp and poignant, pierced through the present. His name was Thomas. He had gentle hands and a quiet voice. He was a foreman on a cattle ranch, a steady, dependable man who had offered her a life of quiet stability. Not love, perhaps, not the fiery passion of storybooks, but a sanctuary. Her family, newly arrived from the South, sought only acceptance, a place where their skin color would not be a brand of inferiority. Thomas, a white man of good standing, represented that fragile hope. His offer of marriage was not just a proposal, it was a promise of respectability, a bridge to a better life for her and her kin. She had accepted not with a heart full of yearning, but with a pragmatism born of necessity. She had convinced herself that comfort and security were enough, that a life without constant struggle was a prize worth any sacrifice. Perhaps he had been pressured, perhaps his family, or the town itself, had threatened him into abandoning her. The shame of marrying a black woman, even one as poised and elegant as Adira, proved too heavy a burden for his gentle spirit. The thought solidified her conviction. This town, this society, was a cage designed to crush those who dared to defy its unspoken rules. The dust churned beneath the horse's hooves, mirroring the tempest within her, a quiet fury beginning to simmer beneath the surface of her grief. Asterisk. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, they made camp beside a meandering stream, its low gurgle the only sound in the vast stillness. The gunslinger moved with an efficient grace, building a small fire, his movements economical, practiced. Adira watched him, a quiet observer, the air between them still thick with unspoken questions. The chill of the desert night began to settle, and she shivered, less from cold and more from the weight of her uncertainty. He noticed, and without a word, tossed her a worn but clean woolen blanket. It wasn't kindness, not exactly, but a practical gesture that spoke volumes. "My name is Silas," he offered, his voice a low rumble across the crackling fire. It was the first time he had volunteered any personal information, and Adira found herself listening, her heart inexplicably quickening. "And you, Adira," he remembered her name, a small, unexpected spark of connection in the desolate landscape. He then reached up, slowly removing his hat, revealing the full extent of the damage to his face. The scars weren't just superficial lines. They were deep, angry welts, pulling at the corner of his eye and twisting his mouth into a permanent, almost grotesque sneer. They were not from a single incident, but from a lifetime of brutal encounters, a testament to a harsh existence. "You want to know about these?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, not on her. It was a rhetorical question, a challenge, an invitation. He spoke, his voice carrying the echoes of distant thunder. His story was not one of simple heroism, but of a man forged in the unforgiving crucible of frontier justice, often blurred with vengeance. He had been a scout, then a drifter, caught in conflicts that were rarely clean, rarely fair. The scars were a testament to a betrayal, not unlike her own, but one steeped in blood and the bitter taste of revenge. A false accusation, a frame-up, a desperate fight for survival against overwhelming odds. He had lost everything: his family, his good name, his innocence. The world had branded him a killer, a rogue, and he had simply leaned into the role. "They tried to bury me," he murmured, his voice laced with a raw emotion he quickly suppressed. "Just like they tried to bury you today. Saw it in your eyes, that quiet fury. That's what drew me." His motivation was not altruism, nor a blossoming affection, but a cold, hard recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else discarded by the system. He saw a reflection of his own past in her present, a common enemy in the societal prejudice that sought to crush them both. He had claimed her not as a lover, but as an ally, a fellow outcast in a world that refused to grant them dignity. The implication was clear. He offered a path of survival, a defiance against the forces that sought to obliterate them. His scars were not just a physical mark. They were a badge of his refusal to break, a silent promise that he would not let her break either. He had seen her strength beneath the humiliation, the fire simmering beneath the ashes of her hope, and that had resonated with the broken yet unyielding man he was. The next morning, the silence of the wilderness shattered. A group of riders, their faces grim and determined, emerged from the distant hills, their presence a stark, unwelcome intrusion. They were local men, known faces from the town, perhaps the brother of Thomas, or some self-appointed vigilantes, their purpose clear: to reclaim Adira, or perhaps to finish what the altar had started. Their dust cloud billowed behind them like a harbinger of doom. Silas reacted with a chilling swiftness. He pushed Adira behind a cluster of boulders, his hand already on the worn grip of his revolver. His face, usually a mask of grim stoicism, tightened with a dangerous resolve, the scars seeming to deepen with the rising tension. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl that brooked no argument. Adira, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, obeyed, but her eyes remained fixed on the approaching figures, a cold dread twisting in her gut. The riders fanned out, their voices carrying on the wind, harsh and accusatory. "Silas Blackwood! We know it's you! Leave that woman! She's got a family to answer to!" Their words were laced with the familiar venom of self-righteousness, a thinly veiled excuse for their prejudice. Silas offered no response, his silence more unnerving than any threat. He simply waited, poised and deadly. The tension was a living thing, a palpable weight pressing down on the arid landscape. Adira watched, transfixed, as the first rider dared to approach, his hand reaching for his own weapon. Suddenly, a shot ripped through the air, sharp and deafening. It wasn't Silas's. The lead rider cried out, his horse rearing, throwing him to the ground. Adira saw a flicker of movement from Silas's position, a blur of practiced precision. He had disarmed the man without a word, a warning shot that spoke volumes. The remaining riders hesitated, their bravado faltering in the face of his lethal efficiency. This wasn't a fair fight, not in their minds. This was an encounter with a ghost, a legend of violence made flesh. One of them, a burly man with a cruel sneer, finally spoke, his voice shaking. "We heard tell you'd taken up with a colored woman. Just confirming the rumors. We don't want your kind around here." Silas finally spoke, his voice a low, dangerous whisper that carried across the dry air, imbued with an icy fury. "She's not kind. She's a woman. And she's with me. You want her? You come get her." The challenge hung heavy, a stark line drawn in the dust. The confrontation was not just about Adira, or about Silas. It was about the very boundaries of their existence, the right to simply be, in a world that sought to deny them. The riders, cowed by his unwavering resolve and the chilling promise in his eyes, slowly began to retreat, their bravado dissolving into grudging defeat. The alliance, born of desperation, had now been forged in the crucible of shared danger. Adira, witnessing Silas's quiet, formidable power, felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion stir within her, not love, but a profound, almost primal trust, a silent understanding that in this harsh world, they were perhaps each other's only shelter. The confrontation had passed, leaving behind a silence more profound than before, yet now imbued with the lingering scent of gunpowder and the faint taste of adrenaline. Adira emerged from behind the rocks, her wedding dress streaked with dust, but her eyes clear, reflecting a new, hard-won resolve. Silas watched her, his expression unreadable, before holstering his revolver with a deliberate click. As they resumed their journey, a different kind of tension settled between them, not of fear, but of shared trauma and unspoken understanding. The day wore on, each mile etching itself into Adira's memory, slowly peeling back layers of composure to reveal the raw nerve of her pain. A memory, vivid and searing, resurfaced, not a gentle current but a tidal wave. Her grandmother, a woman whose skin was the color of rich earth, like Adira's, but whose eyes held the wisdom of countless sunrises, had always told stories. Stories of their family's journey from the south, of endless toil under a merciless sun, of promises broken and hopes crushed by the relentless tide of prejudice. She remembered her grandmother's hands, gnarled with work, smoothing her hair, whispering tales of resilience, of finding dignity where none was offered. "Our worth," she had often said, "is not measured by their eyes, child. It is in the steadfastness of our spirit, the unyielding beat of our hearts." Asterisk. Adira had carried these words, these legacies of struggle and survival, within her. The marriage to Thomas was meant to be the culmination of their arduous journey, a beacon of acceptance in a world that had always denied them their place. It was not just her future at stake, but the very validation of her family's enduring hope, the generational yearning for a life unburdened by the constant shadow of racial injustice. When Thomas failed to appear, it wasn't merely a personal slight. It was a devastating echo of every broken promise, every humiliating slight, every door slammed shut in the face of her ancestors. It was a reaffirmation of the very prejudice her grandmother had warned against, a cruel reminder that despite their resilience, some chains remained unbroken. The public spectacle, the whispers, the deliberate abandonment, it all coalesced into a symbolic lynching of her spirit, a crushing weight of inherited sorrow and fresh, agonizing despair. Asterisk. The memory brought with it a profound, shuddering grief that threatened to overwhelm her. She reined in her mare, stopping in the middle of the desolate plain, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It was the deepest she had allowed herself to fall since the chapel, a raw outpouring of the pain she had stubbornly contained. Silas, riding ahead, stopped and turned, his dark eyes observing her with an intensity that pierced through her anguish. He didn't offer comfort, didn't approach, just remained there, a silent sentinel, allowing her the space to confront the brutal truth of her sorrow, the inherited weight of her pain. And as the tears flowed, something shifted within her. The grief, though profound, began to clear the fog, revealing not weakness, but a formidable strength forged in the fire of injustice. The quiet fury that had simmered before now sharpened into an unyielding resolve. Her worth was not defined by their scorn. Her spirit, indeed, remained steadfast. The days that followed were a testament to the raw, unyielding frontier. Adira, shedding the tattered remnants of her wedding dress for more practical attire Silas had procured from a desolate trading post, hardened with every mile. Her skin, once the color of polished mahogany, was now dusted with the plain's fine grit, but her eyes held a fierce, unyielding light. Silas, ever the silent guardian, watched her transformation, a grim satisfaction playing at the edges of his scarred mouth. Their journey led them not to a new beginning, but to a confrontation, a necessary reckoning that hung unspoken between them. Silas had heard whispers, had tracked the rumors that led them to a burgeoning mining town, a place where prejudice festered like an open wound, and where Thomas, the man who had abandoned Adira, had fled in shame. They found him in a dusty saloon, drowning his guilt in cheap whiskey, his face etched with a cowardice that made Adira's stomach churn. He looked nothing like the man she had agreed to marry, no longer the gentle foreman, but a hollowed-out shell, consumed by his own weakness. His abandonment had been driven not by external force, but by an internal rot, a fear of societal disapproval that outweighed any sense of honor or commitment. The sight of him, pathetic and broken, twisted the knife of her past humiliation, confirming the depth of his betrayal. Silas, ever the instrument of blunt consequence, approached him, his presence casting a long, intimidating shadow over the table. The conversation was terse, the air crackling with unspoken violence. "You broke her," Silas stated, his voice a low growl that carried over the din of the saloon, drawing the attention of the rough clientele. Thomas looked up, his eyes widening in terror as he recognized the infamous Gunslinger, and then, slowly, Adira, standing resolute behind him, her presence, a silent accusation, stripped him bare of any lingering pretense. Silas didn't draw his weapon, not yet. He simply stood there, a physical embodiment of judgment, allowing the weight of Adira's gaze to do its work. "What do you want?" Thomas croaked, his voice barely a whisper, fearing the swift justice of Silas's reputation. Adira stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, a testament to the strength she had found in the desolate miles. "I want you to know," she began, her voice echoing with the quiet power of a storm gathering, "that your cowardice did not break me. It forged me, and that the life you denied me, I will build for myself, on my own terms, free of your prejudice and your fear." Her words were a searing indictment, more devastating than any bullet. Silas, seeing her strength, simply took Thomas's hand, crushing a small, worn token into his palm, a single silver bullet, a silent, chilling promise of future consequence if he dared to interfere with her again. The message was clear. This was not forgiveness, but a declaration of enduring freedom, a quiet, devastating victory. The dust of the saloon settled, but the tremors of that confrontation lingered. Adira walked out, not with a sense of vengeance, but with a profound liberation. The ghost of Thomas, the shame of the altar, had been laid to rest not by violence, but by the fierce reclamation of her own spirit. Silas followed, his presence a silent affirmation of her newfound resolve. They mounted their horses, leaving the mining town and its small-minded inhabitants behind, venturing toward a horizon unknown, yet now less daunting. The relationship between them had evolved, transforming from a desperate pact into something deeper, more complex than simple friendship or even companionship. He had claimed her, not as property, but as a shared truth, a fellow traveler on the periphery of a society that had deemed them unworthy. His scars, physical and emotional, resonated with her own deep wounds, forging a bond built on understanding rather than expectation. There was no grand declaration of love, no romantic promise of a future paved with ease. Their connection was forged in the grit and fire of survival, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to find connection in the most desolate of landscapes. They were two broken pieces, not necessarily fitting perfectly, but interlocking in a way that offered mutual strength against the relentless pressures of a world that sought to categorize and diminish them. They found a small, isolated valley, hidden amongst craggy peaks, where a forgotten spring bubbled forth, nurturing a patch of verdant land. Here, under the vast, indifferent sky, they began to build something new, not a home in the conventional sense, but a sanctuary, a place where their pasts could coexist with a fragile, burgeoning future. Adira, with her quiet strength and innate grace, nurtured the land, transforming it into a small haven. Silas, with his grim pragmatism and a surprising gentleness reserved solely for her, protected it, turning his deadly skills towards a purpose beyond mere survival. The word claimed had transformed its meaning entirely. It was no longer about possession, but about recognition, about standing alongside another soul in defiance of the world's harsh judgments. Adira was not defined by her past, nor by the man who abandoned her. She was a woman forged anew, resilient and powerful, her future unbound by societal chains. Silas, too, found a quiet redemption in her presence, a purpose beyond the endless wandering, a place where his scars were not a curse but a testament to a life lived, and now repurposed. Their story was not a tale of a conventional happy ending, but a raw, grounded narrative of two flawed individuals finding an unconventional path to dignity and belonging, one step at a time, under the vast, indifferent gaze of the western sky. It was a journey into the dark, yes, but one that promised, in its hard-won resolution, a glimmer of profound, resilient hope.